Hi there, welcome to another edition of Israel Explained. The hostage deal is in even deeper crisis than it was yesterday edition. So yesterday I said that the key to whether this ceasefire will continue to proceed is in the hands of Trump. About an hour or two after I finished recording, Trump decided to indeed show that this is in his hands and make a statement that has since completely changed the crisis and thrown everyone into greater confusion. So let me try to get some order out of the incredible amount of chaos that we have to deal with here. So Trump said that if Hamas does not return the hostages by 12 o'clock on Saturday, I say cancel the ceasefire and all bets are off. All hell will break loose, end quote. He later clarified that it's up to the Israelis to decide, but that certainly boxed Israel into a somewhat extreme position. If you remember, this whole crisis started because Hamas said they would not be releasing any hostages until further notice because of alleged Israeli violations of the ceasefire. Trump has turned it into a standoff where he expects Hamas to release all the hostages by Saturday. Netanyahu said that if Hamas doesn't return our hostages on Saturday, we will return to war until the destruction of Hamas, he said after Trump's comments. A lot of people noted at the time that Netanyahu didn't mention a number of hostages, which would allow him to settle for only 3 hostages. But as we'll see, that's changed since then. Netanyahu's been boxed in by Trump, and he's been boxed in by his right-wing coalition partner Smotrich and his former coalition partner Ben-Gvir, who's now trying to get back into the government. Is this very confusing? Yes, it's very confusing, but I will try to make order out of all of this. Now, when Trump was asked to clarify his comments, he said, "You will find out and Hamas will find out what I mean," which has led some people to believe that he doesn't really know what he means. And he may be expecting Israel to do the attack, not the United States. He stressed that Hamas is looking for reasons not to release more hostages because the hostages are, quote, badly hurt both physically and mentally. What you see is probably the best, end quote. He said the hostages need to be released, not in drips, not 3 or 2 of them, all of them, end quote. And he also added that he thinks a lot of the hostages are dead. So I've been hearing a lot this theory that Hamas hasn't been releasing the hostages because they're in bad condition and they're worried about their PR. I don't think that's true. That's a very American way of looking at things. They look at the hostages as leverage. The PR is a lot less important to them. They know that their image in the United States is not necessarily very good, but they also think that Israel's image is not particularly good right now with various ICC cases and talking about ethnic cleansing and so on. It doesn't strike me that they're particularly worried about that. They're worried about how many hostages they have, leverage, and trying to get to the second phase, which is increasingly looking like a hopeless cause for Hamas. But we're going to talk about that. So after Trump's declaration, Netanyahu finds himself in a very unfamiliar and very uncomfortable position. He's used to having Biden to his left, who he can, use as a rival. But now he has Trump outflanking him on the right. Sometimes on the left, Trump just says various things. But right now, he's outflanking him vastly to the right. And that forces Netanyahu to the right as well. After Trump said all those comments about restarting the war, Ben-Gvir said, quote, "If Netanyahu goes back to war, I will return to the government." If you remember, he left the government about a month ago. He also said that Trump's statements on ethnic cleansing and restarting the war are, quote, "an opportunity we cannot miss." Meanwhile, Smotrich, who's still in the government, wanted to fully embrace the Trump declaration and said so in the cabinet meeting that took place to discuss this matter. He says either Israel gets all the hostages by Saturday at noon or the war should be restarted. He even put out a video in which he said that his interpretation of all the hell that is going to break loose is that there will be, quote, no electricity, no water, no food, just fire and brimstone, end quote. After that, he wants Israel to take over all of Gaza and remove all of its residents. So notice that Smotrich's version is a little bit different from Trump's. He doesn't see Gaza as something that will be American. He sees it as something that will be Israeli. And it'll be interesting to see if that causes any problems. Considering that the ethnic cleansing of Gaza is probably not going to happen fully, probably not, but there's definitely a difference there. It's interesting that all these people who are, for the full land of Israel, Greater Israel, are willing or to consider giving Gaza to the United States, which is certainly not Greater Israel, no matter how you look at it. So like I said, Netanyahu said in his initial statement, he wants the hostages back on Saturday, but he didn't name a number. Later, he said, through his pseudonym as a senior security source, he constantly releases statements as a senior security source. And everyone knows that it's him, so it's a statement from him, but then he has plausible deniability. It's dumb, but that's what he's doing. So he said later that he wants 9 hostages back on Saturday, as in the rest of the first phase hostages. Now he released a statement finally after all this pressure from Trump, Ben-Gvir, and Smotrich, saying that Israel expects all the hostages back on Saturday. So it's a rapidly escalating number and a rapidly escalating Israeli approach. There doesn't seem to be any policy here, really, aside from trying to keep up with Trump. Clearly, Smotrich and Trump are forcing Netanyahu into taking more extreme positions than he otherwise would like. In my opinion, if it was up to Netanyahu, he would like to finish the first phase, get all the hostages out in the first phase, and then blow up the talks. But it looks like he might not even be able to do that because of the pressure that he's receiving from Trump and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir to do that. So he's already caving to Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and Trump. Because of the escalating demands on Hamas, I find it very unlikely that Hamas will release any hostages on Saturday, because why would they? They'd be giving up their leverage to reach the end of the first phase and bridge it to the second phase. It increasingly looks like they're not going to get that second phase and that another round of fighting will be necessary. Every hostage is important leverage to get Israel back to the negotiating table after the next round of fighting, or in order to prevent ethnic cleansing. Either way you look at it, Hamas is going to need those hostages. This crisis puts them in a position where they're very unlikely to relinquish the hostages. Nonetheless, Hamas has said that they remain committed to the ceasefire. They haven't caved and said they're going to release hostages this Saturday, but they said they're committed to the ceasefire. And I believe they're doing that in order to allow the negotiators, the mediators, to try to salvage something out of the situation. It's increasingly hard to see how that will happen, but maybe they can do so. In order to double down on the threat that Israel has made to restart the war, Netanyahu released a video where he said, quote, "I have ordered the IDF to amass forces in Gaza and around Gaza." And indeed, according to reports, the 2 divisions that are in Gaza and near Gaza have now been supplemented by 2 further brigades that have been ordered to go further south. The understanding is that if the ceasefire collapses, the operation planned by the IDF will be, quote, "very forceful." The army has also canceled all leave and all civilian events near Gaza. Hamas is also preparing for the renewal of the war. They've ordered their senior commanders to stop using cell phones out of fear that they're being tracked by Israel for assassinations, and to prepare for a restart of the war. They certainly don't want to restart the war, but they may be understanding that they have no choice. Now, the Israeli security apparatus really doesn't want to start the war, at least not before the end of the first phase. In the cabinet meeting about the renewal of the war and the possibility of starting second phase negotiations, a senior security source briefed the cabinet that, quote, "We need to show restraint right now and finish the first phase. We mustn't change the dynamic of the hostage release. The mechanism is working. The mediators are guaranteeing the deal, and there is no real reason to interrupt the continuity now. So the IDF position is that Israel should get back as many hostages as possible, finishing definitely the first round. And there are plenty of people in the IDF who think that Israel should also pursue a second round. That used to be the consensus before the Trump plan. I don't know if it is anymore, but there's still people who feel that way. They want to destroy Hamas and get back into the war once as many hostages as possible have been released. Now, in the meantime, there's also a lot going on in the Arab world. The Arab League is meeting to discuss a new peace proposal that they hope would appeal to Trump so that they can get Trump on board and force Israel into making some concessions so that it will be able to avoid the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. In order to pursue that, the Arab League is telling Hamas to continue with the ceasefire. So there is pressure on Hamas to continue with the ceasefire from the Arab League. Is that worth it for them to give up leverage in terms of hostages? Only if they think the Arab League move has a good chance of succeeding. And it's not clear if that's what Hamas thinks. So Hamas have a very interesting and complex strategic dilemma ahead of them. In other news in the Arab world, of course, Trump is trying to convince the Arab states to take as many refugees as possible from Gaza. President of Egypt, al-Sisi, has not been willing to meet with Trump. He's outraged at the attempt to force his country into taking in refugees from Gaza. But Jordanian King Abdallah II is in Washington, D.C. right now and looked quite uncomfortable next to Trump, who, by the way, called him a great man. Abdallah was finessing Trump as best as he could. He agreed to take in 2,000 sick children from Gaza. And he said that he will talk to other Arab leaders about taking in refugees from Gaza. All that is a elegant way of saying no to Trump without confronting him. I think Abdallah is hoping that Egypt does the heavy lifting in that regard, which so far they are doing, and gonna try to hide behind Egypt, try to hide behind the Arab League, and hope not to be punished by Trump for not taking in refugees. But I don't see Jordan taking in a significant amount of refugees either way. So that's where we stand right now. The hostage deal is an absolute crisis. The ceasefire is an absolute crisis. I think the chances of reaching a second phase are almost zero. And the chances of completing the first phase are not very high. I don't know, maybe about 50% at best. So I'll be following this closely. Stay with us here. If you like what I'm doing here, consider supporting me on Patreon. Consider following my Substack called The Grand Scheme. Listen to my History of the Land of Israel podcast, where I'm working on a series about Hezekiah's religious reforms in Judah. I will see you here the next time something interesting happens, which will, of course, be very soon. This is the Middle East.